The Iranian regime has been decapitated. The Ayatollah is dead. Former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is dead. And the Israeli and U.S.-led strikes continue unabated with no end in sight. There's a lot of predictions going around about what happens with post-war Iran, and most of those predictions are very rosy. I have great hopes for it. I have prayers for it, but I wouldn't put my money on any of these predictions coming true. The track record of regime change is almost always that the result doesn't match what was anticipated. I didn't anticipate these strikes coming on Iran this weekend. I think a bigger surprise would be if any of these rosy predictions turn out to be true, because the track record of revolutions is not a very good one when it comes to predictions matching results. Let's talk about it. I'm sitting on a fallen tree. It came down about 7 years ago, and it's one of the largest trees on the property. Usually you see a tree, you don't think, oh, that's gonna fall, particularly a big tree like this, but big trees do fall. Iran is not exactly a big tree, but it looks like it's on the verge of falling. Who knows what's gonna happen in the coming days? Well, some people seem to know. They predict a very bright future for Iran, and they reflexively think that Iran is going to become kind of like a Western-style democracy. I wouldn't bet the house on that happening. There may be better things indeed in store for Iran, but there is this Western delusion that you see almost always when there's regime change or revolution in foreign lands. We think, wow, these people, they're going to be just like us. They're going to be just like Americans or Europeans. It never seems to turn out that way. But like Charlie Brown going for that football, we always try to make the kick, even though we know that Lucy's going to pull it away. My apologies for the windy conditions. You can't fight Mother Nature. We're about 47 years removed from the Iranian Revolution. We're coming up on the anniversary, and it may or may not last until that 47th anniversary. When that happened, in late 1978 and early 1979, there were all sorts of Westerners making wild predictions about what Iran would be after the Shah. And they were almost always predictions that kind of reflected the inner ideology of the predictor. Now, I want to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. They were wildly off. They were so astronomically off what actually happened in Iran that it's comical. They were basically just projecting what they wanted to happen upon real events on the ground, and the two things didn't go together. Mother Jones asked, this is in early 1979, what kind of a state might result if Khomeini or his followers take power? He said democratic reforms, freedom for political prisoners, an end to the astronomical waste of huge arms purchases, and a constitutional government. This is a guy who knew Khomeini, and he said that we should expect a post-war Iran to be like Portugal or Spain after Franco and Salazar. He was seeing the world, obviously, through rose-tinted lenses. To Mother Jones's credit, the following year, a guy, I think it was Adam Hochschild, he said, listen, we got it wrong. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. And he said that, leftists have a good sense of the conditions that will lead to revolution. I think he wrote something like that. But we don't have a good sense of what's going to happen the day after the revolution. And I think at least that second part is absolutely correct. And it was good for that writer at Mother Jones to admit the mistake that they had made. Kai Bird, you remember him? Kai Bird, Pulitzer Prize-winning writer. He was the co-author of the Oppenheimer biography that became that movie a few years ago. So this is a very established writer, maybe less so in 1979. But in The Nation, he wrote, there's every reason to believe that the still unpublished Constitution will include all the elements of a liberal democratic system. He wrote that in The Nation. This is in 1979. And obviously, within a few weeks, events proved him wrong. He thought, because there were people peddling Marx on the streets of Tehran, that the results of the Iranian Revolution were going to be a lot different than they actually were. He put a lot of stock in these things called the worker comitas. The worker comitas. These were in the oil fields, like small committees of workers. And he said these worker groups, they're going to share in the profits after the revolution. It didn't really work out that way. Michel Foucault, most famously, or I should say most infamously, got it wrong on Iran. And I say infamously because Foucault was an atheist, he was a homosexual, he was an academic. Those kind of people didn't fare too well under Khomeini. He wrote, by Islamic government, this is in 1978, he said, by Islamic government, nobody in Iran means a political regime in which the clerics would have a role in supervision or control. That was his prediction. What did he think would happen? He said, well, there would be majority rule democracy, minorities would be protected and free, there would be equal rights between the sexes, and there would be socialism. Leftists basically looked at Iran and thought, this is going to be the incarnation of our dreams. And they looked at a guy like Khomeini, even just physiognomically, he's a grim-looking figure, and they thought, oh no, he's one of us. I mean, to me, that's so profoundly delusional that you'd almost have to invent a new word for it. But they got Iran wrong then. And my whole purpose in bringing this up is that possibly we're getting Iran wrong now, in the sense that we imagine this country is dying to be just like us. And I'm not sure that that's the case. I hope for a better Iran, and I think there will be a better Iran if we get rid of this regime. Do I see Iranians not being anti-Semitic or being pro-American? Do I see it being a free country? I don't see that. I can see a better Iran, but I don't know that it's going to be the Iran of our dreams. I want to make 2 points. Westerners don't understand Islam. And what we do is we imagine that the ideals that we have in Western civilization are human ideals, rather than gifts that have been cultivated over the millennia. We imagine that our ideals, our Western ideals, are human ideals. They're global ideals. But when you look around, that's not the case. And every attempt to impose our Western ideals on foreign countries fails miserably. I mean, look at Afghanistan. It's almost like they erased 20 years of history. We were there for 20 years. Now they're back to where they were in 2001. So this is a conceit that Westerners have, rather than Western civilization, Christendom, cultivating things like pluralism, freedom in the economy, democracy, certain rights that are God-given that can't be taken away. Rather than seeing these things as gifts that have developed over time in a certain location, in a certain time and place, they see them as universal human values. And when they attempt to impose them on other people, so often we fail. They have a different history. They have a different religion. They live in a different part of the world. They speak a different language. There's so many things different about Iranians vis-a-vis Americans, and we lose sight of that. We just think they're going to become Vermont-style town meeting members, and when they never do in Iraq or Egypt or wherever, we say, oh, gee, we must have done something wrong. We did do something wrong. The whole idea of it was at its base incorrect. I think it's important for us to stop projecting our fantasies upon other countries, stop projecting our civilization upon other countries. This doesn't make them worse. It just means they're different. They're different from us. And there's probably some things that are better about Iranians than us. And there's probably a lot of things that are worse. But it's not a question of us being superior or them being inferior. It's just a recognition that cultures differ. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of Westerners to understand, this universalization of our society. We think that everyone's dying to be like us. I don't think that they are. The second point I want to make is that revolutions usually fail. Regime change usually fails. You can change the regime, but what comes after is usually not what we had anticipated. And I would imagine that this is what's going to happen here. It's hard to think that Iran is going to be any worse than it is. That's hard to think, but it's possible. Ideologues are bad at guessing what comes next. They're very bad at that. They don't ask that question. We really don't understand the history of revolutions. They usually go bad. And I realize this is not exactly a revolution in Iran. It's sort of something that's being imposed from the outside. And there's a lot of forces, obviously, on the inside that want to overthrow that regime, too. So this is a little bit different. It's not completely analogous. But if you look at the history of revolutions, most of them don't go well. The revolution in America is an exception to that. But if you think the Iranian Revolution, they probably thought, oh, it can't get worse than the Shah guy. Well, it did. The Soviet Revolution, the Russian Revolution, they overthrew the people who overthrew the czars. because there was chaos and there was a lack of order, they came in and they filled that power vacuum. And that often happens in revolution. There's a lot of chaos. You look at the French Revolution, so many of the leaders of that wound up on the guillotine. And so many revolutions, they decry corruption, they decry the oppression and violence of the existing state. Then when they take power themselves, they start being brutal, they start being oppressive, they start being corrupt, they start stealing money. They find that they like power, and they exercise it in a way that's often very similar to the people that they had replaced. I don't know that that's going to happen in Iran or not. Like I said, it's hard to see it getting worse, but we should at least consider the option. I mean, most people who look at regime change and revolution, they think in terms of options between better and best. And I think we should look at the options being better and worse. We don't tend to look at worse as a possible outcome for revolutions, but most of the time, regime change, revolution, it gets worse, not better. I don't know that that's going to happen in Iran, but what I do know is that whatever the outcome is, it's not going to be one that any of us has anticipated. I'll be keeping my eye on it, and I think the rest of the world is keeping their eye on it too. Thanks for sticking with me. As always, like and subscribe.